So before I start this video, I just want to say that the primal diet should be the base of your looks maxing, right? If you're interested in ascending and looks maxing, then you should at least be on some variation of the primal diet, right? Although it is not a replacement for looks maxing, which is kind of the whole point of this video, it is the health base of it, right? Because let's say you see all of these peptides and drugs on TikTok and you feel like, oh, I need MT2 so I can tan and improve my coloring. Well, if you eat the primal diet and you don't eat any seed oils, then you'll naturally be able to tan in the sun and you'll be able to, improve your coloring without needing any MT2 melanotan, any of that, right? Same thing with acne, right? Let's say right now you feel like, oh, I need Accutane and GHKCU and tretinoin for my acne and my skin. Well, if you just eat the primal diet and get in the sun as well, then naturally you won't have acne and you won't have all those skin problems because you're addressing the root of the problem. And again, you won't be needing to inject those Chinese research chemical peptides, as they would say. Same thing with even lean maxing, right? Let's say you want a lean max and you're looking at retatrutide or Ozempic and all of these drugs for lean maxing. Again, if you eat the primal diet instead of just eating whatever grain sludge goy slop that you get from your local McDonald's, then naturally your appetite will align and then you'll naturally be at a healthy lean body fat, right? At a healthy body fat that is lean, right? If you want to get super lean, like sub 10%, sub 8%, then sure, you might have to go to more extremes, maybe even use drugs. But if you're just trying to get to a lean, healthy body fat, then the primal diet, just eating the primal diet will do that for you. So I'm not saying you shouldn't eat the primal diet, but I'm just saying that we have to be realistic with what it can do for you in terms of ascension, especially after puberty. And the way that you should be going about it, right, like I said, the primal diet should be the base of your looks maxing, is basically starting with the most natural health-based methods like the primal diet, and then moving on to more and more unnatural methods based on the health trade-offs that you're willing to make. So what do I mean by this? Let's say we start with the least harmful, safest, and highest return looks max methods. Like, for example, using shoe lifts, right? Shoe lifts, you're not injecting anything into your body. You're not taking any drugs. You're not fucking up your hormones or anything. You're just putting some extra foam in your shoes, and it's going to give you a couple inches of height, which is going to be super high ROI, right? Super high ROI. And the only possible negative health outcome could be, let's say you wear super high shoe lifts for extended periods of time, like months, then it could cause maybe some pelvic tilt and posture problems. But for the most part, it's super safe, right? So we start with the safest, highest return methods, and we tap those out first, right? And again, like another example is, let's say you're trying to max out your eye area by growing your eyelashes and thickening your eyebrows. And you can start with something like castor oil, right? Because castor oil, like this one, is relatively natural. Like obviously it's not completely natural because you have to make the oil, but for the most part, it is relatively natural compared to all of these other drugs. So you use castor oil on your, let's say, eyelashes and your eyebrows, and you find that, oh, okay, when I use castor oil, my eyelashes are growing quite well, but my eyebrows aren't really getting darker. So the more natural method, castor oil, we used it, but it didn't work completely. So because of that, we then move on to more and more quote unquote unnatural methods like using derma stamping or minoxidil, right, to grow your eyebrows. And again, it's all based on the health trade-offs that you're willing to make. Are you willing to accept whatever minor negative health outcomes of using minoxidil, if there's any, for getting thicker eyebrows? If yes, if you're willing to make that trade-off, then cool, you'd use that unnatural method and then you use that to ascend your eyebrows and then ascend yourself even further, right? So we're going from natural to more and more unnatural based on the trade-off that we're willing to make. And then as we go more and more extreme, we start going to the most extreme end, such as getting surgeries, like let's say a hair transplant, or getting something like MSE or even Lefort for, let's say you have a recessed maxilla. And it's also important to note that just because some of these procedures are unnatural, it doesn't mean that they're completely unhealthy, right? Let's say you get an MSE because you have a really narrow palate and you have a really narrow airway. If you get this procedure, even though it's a bit more invasive and quote unquote unnatural, it literally widen your palate and open up your airways and make you more healthier. Same thing could even be said about certain Lefort surgeries, right? Because some people, like when they get Lefort surgeries, it actually opens up their airway and helps them breathe better as well, and it improves their health. But again, this is a lot more risky than something like MSE. So the whole idea is you shouldn't be using the primal diet as a complete substitute for looks maxing. Instead, you should just use it as one of the first steps that you should take for looks maxing. And then once you tap out all of the natural, quote unquote, natural methods, you start going into more unnatural methods based on any trade-off that you're willing to make. And again, a lot of the traditional looks max methods, they're still worth it for their health trade-offs. So you have to understand the reality of what you can change after puberty. And a good example of this, analogy of this, is like mewing, right? If you're mewing when you're 6 years old, 10 years old, when you're really young, it can really make a huge difference in how your jaw looks because your jaw is still developing. However, when you're older, as a fully grown adult, and you start mewing by itself is really not going to cause that much of a difference because your body is already developed. Same thing with hopping on the primal diet, right? If you eat just a bunch of raw liver and raw milk when you're 10 years old, 12 years old, then yeah, it can really make a huge difference to how your body develops, how your height and frame and your bone structure develops and your health in general. But if you're 18 years old, right? If you're 18 years old and your face is recessed and you have a terrible bone structure, you can't really mew or thumb pull or eat liver your way out of that, right? The only real way you can fix your maxilla at that point is realistically going to be through one of the previously mentioned procedures like MSE or Le Fort. And again, even though those are unnatural, it doesn't mean that they're completely unhealthy, right? MSE and Le Fort can literally improve your airway because, like Jester Patel would say, health is looks. Improve your airway, which improve your looks and also improve your health. So we have to be realistic with what changes can be made, especially as you get older. Like even when you're like 16, 17, what changes can be made with the primal diet as well. So I'm just going to show you some primal ascensions and break them down in general, because a lot of these primal ascensions really just come down to growing longer hair because Goda said so, and also just minor improvements in skin. But structurally, there isn't that much difference. So first example is Solar Youth, and he was the guy, at the start of the video as well. Solar Youth, and you can see his transformation, right? And if you look at his face, most of his transformation, like I said, really just comes down to growing his hair longer. In terms of his face, structurally, his face is pretty much the same, right? I think his neck got a little bit thicker, but other than that, his face structurally is pretty much the same. His hair got longer and his coloring improved a bit, right? His skin went from like kind of a pale yellowish color to a lot more healthy red color, and the coloring around his eyes changed as well. But really, for the most part, right, the actual ascension is just growing his hair and slight improvements in skin. And honestly, even if he didn't use the primal diet, he probably could have achieved a somewhat similar transformation, especially regarding to growing his hair longer. So when it comes to all of these primal ascensions that you see on, let's say, TikTok, a lot of them is just growing out their hair, right? The actual magnitude of transformation is not that big. Another example is Primal Marcus, right? You might have seen him online as well. And you can see his transformation, right? Same thing with this guy. The biggest factor of their transformation really just comes down to growing their hair, right? Structurally, his face is more or less the same, right? It's mainly just growing the hair, which can be done without the primal diet, and also improvements in skin, right? Less acne, smoother skin, just better health indicators on the skin in general. But I think he actually uploaded a video, I'm not sure, like a few weeks ago, where he showed his primal transformation, quote unquote, and he showed his side profile before the primal diet and after the primal diet. And it looked pretty much the same, right? I can't find that video now. Maybe he deleted it, but it looked pretty much the same. And everyone in the comments was saying that he made, in terms of the bone structure and side profile, it pretty much made no difference. And also, I believe he's like 16 years old as well. So he could achieve some change through the primal diet, but we also don't know for sure whether these changes are just from him growing through puberty naturally or through the primal diet as a variable in and of itself. Right? So the point I'm trying to make is that when it comes to the primal diet ascensions, it's unless you have a really good base and unless you are really young, let's say 12 years old, it's really not going to make that big of a difference, right? If you have a poor base already and you're already like 17, 18 years old, then it's really not going to ascend you as much as you think it would, right? It's not going to double your bideltoid and add 5 inches of height or any of that. Chances are, after a certain age, what the primal diet is going to do for you is it's going to help your skin look better, right? It's going to help you depload a bit, but that's about it, right? You're not going to get, the crazy bideltoid height increase and look like one of those fucking Maasai guys that you see on YouTube, right? So again, if you're happy with the results of the primal diet alone, that's great, but don't expect it to ascend you like crazy, especially if you're at an older age, right? 17, 18, and you don't already have a good base. Chances are you would still need to use traditional LooksMax strategies, right? And again, I talked a bit about LooksMax strategies earlier in this video, like about height frauding, eye area, and all of that. But there's one specific softmax, one specific LooksMax strategy that seems to be the most shunned and most looked down upon by the primal crowd. And that LooksMax, or softmax I should say, is gonna be gym selling. Now, before you go and call me a brainwashed slave for lifting man-made metal and all of that, I just have 3 points that I want to make in regards to gym selling as the next logical softmax that you should do. Firstly, gym selling is a softmax that has the potential to make the greatest magnitude of physical change in your body. Secondly, gym selling essentially works and makes you more effective by, that's a typo, by frauding your genetics and physical development. So you're frauding better genetics, sexual dimorphism, better bones, etc., which I'm going to explain soon as well. And lastly, there are ways, most important, there are ways that you can use the gym to LooksMax whilst minimizing the negative health outcomes. So there are ways you can gym sell whilst minimizing, your aging, your cortisol, your stress, all of that stuff. So I'm going to start with the first point. Gym selling is a softmax that has the greatest magnitude of physical change, right? Because like I said earlier, after a certain point, right, let's say after you get to 17, 18 years old, stuff like mewing really isn't going to do that much for your face, right? You can't really change your bone in general at that age, right? Mewing is not going to change your facial bones. Eating more raw liver and drinking raw milk is really not going to change your bideltoid or your height that much. So the greatest magnitude of physical change that you can make are mainly going to be firstly through your hair, right? That's like a big transformation in these guys. But secondly, through gym selling, right? Because gym selling, it's like literally the greatest difference that you can make in your physical appearance. If you were to break it down into the two components of gym selling, which are going to be lean maxing, which lean maxing in and of itself is going to make one of the biggest transformations ever, but also the second component, which is hypertrophy, right? So we have lean maxing, which is losing adipose tissue, which again, by itself is super powerful. And then hypertrophy, which is adding contractile proteins, right? Building muscle, which again, in itself is super powerful as well. So these two components of gym selling by themselves will make a massive difference to how you look and your looks. But if you combine them together, then gym selling really is gonna be the softmax that has the greatest amount of change that you can produce in your physical body, right? The only thing that comes close, again, is hair. So, but you might be thinking, oh, but Goatus said that muscle doesn't make you attractive, and gym selling is useless because muscles are useless anyways. Well, that brings me to my second point, is that gym selling essentially works by frauding your genetics and physical development, right? Higher testosterone, better dimorphism, better bones, etc. And I'm going to use a few examples to prove to you why. First example is training your neck, right? Because most people probably heard of it by now, but having a thick neck is a sign of high testosterone, and that's why a lot of people train their neck. But essentially, when you train your neck, you're basically frauding better sexual dimorphism and higher testosterone than you already have. Because let's say you naturally have the genetic predisposition to have high testosterone and a thick neck, and if you had high testosterone and if you had raw liver and raw milk in your childhood, you would naturally have a thick neck like this, right? But you didn't, right? That's why by training your neck, you're essentially frauding the sign of high testosterone and making yourself appear like you have higher testosterone than you actually do. And you might be thinking, well, isn't that frauding? Yeah, right? The whole point of LooksMaxing is essentially frauding. After you max out your health, you're essentially just frauding better genetics and better physical development than you already have. So something like training your neck is going to be, and just having more muscle on your body in general, is going to be frauding higher testosterone and better physical development, right? Because you can imagine, you're basically, if you were to naturally have higher testosterone and better development, then you would naturally have more muscle. But you're frauding, right, through gym selling, that you have better development than you actually do, right? If you can kind of get my point. So, right, first point, you're frauding higher testosterone. And secondly, the second common method is just by frauding better bones, right? And the way you fraud better bones through gym selling is you basically gym sell in a way that aligns with your sexual dimorphism and the bone structure corresponding to that sexual dimorphism. So what do I mean by that? I'm going to use a female example first because that's what most guys can understand better. But females, if you were to look at the sexual dimorphic differences, females naturally have wider hip bones, right? They're shorter and they have wider hip bones because wide hips is a high estrogen trait, and it signals that you're better at giving birth because the kid can just pop out better when it comes to giving birth. And then if you were to look at this gym selling transformation, this 1-year transformation, most guys, right, pretty much every guy would say that the second picture is a lot more attractive than the first picture, even though they have the same bone structure and they're the same person who's only been building muscle for 1 year. So that in itself kind of debunks the whole idea of building muscle is useless and building muscle won't make you more attractive. But the point I want to make is that the reason that she looks more attractive in this second photo is, firstly, is because she built up the muscles in the glutes, right? The gluteus maximus. But it's not because of the glute muscle itself, right? It's not because when we see this photo and we find it a lot more attractive, it's not because we're attracted to the gluteus maximus muscle. It's because by building up the gluteus muscle, this woman is basically frauding wider hips than she actually has, right? You can see in the before photo, her hips aren't very wide. She kind of has normal hip bones. But by building the muscle here, when we look at this photo, we're basically subconsciously believing that she has wider hips than she actually does, because the glutes create the illusion of wider hips. So when we see this photo, our monkey brain, well, I shouldn't say monkey brain, but our primal brain basically believes that she has wide hip bones and that she's good at giving birth. And that's why we're attracted to it. We're not attracted to it because of the gluteus muscle itself, but it's because the gluteus muscle creates the illusion of better bones, of wider pelvis, right? So that's the whole point behind frauding bones. And the male example for this is pretty simple as well, right? Males naturally are taller and have a wider frame, wider upper body over here. So the whole point of male gym selling is to focus on the upper body, building up the muscles in the shoulders, lats, traps to create the illusion of longer clavicles, right? The shoulders create the illusion of longer clavicles and just a wider frame in general. So those are just two examples of how gym selling makes you more attractive, right? You're basically frauding better genetics and physical development. And also, not sure who needs to hear this, but a lot of people in this primal space need to have a little bit more critical thinking, right? Because I basically had to explain to you that, oh yeah, going to the gym will make you more attractive. Even if you ask any sane person, they will know that it's common sense. But a lot of these primal motherfuckers just don't really have a lot of critical thinking, and they just do whatever Godus tells them to do, or they do whatever Arjuna's Wonderplanet says in his book or whatever. So yeah, just, I don't know who needs to hear this, but a lot of you primal people need to have a little bit more critical thinking. So lastly, last point I want to make, which is a big concern for a lot of people, is that there are ways that you can use the gym to looks max whilst minimizing the negative health outcomes, like having less stress, having less cortisol maxing, less aging. And there are a lot of ways you can do this, right? And that's kind of a big point I talk about in my channel, and I made a lot of videos on that. But the biggest tip, right, the single biggest advice I can give you right now in this video is to basically just skip legs. When you skip legs, you're removing some of the most stressful exercises like squats, right? The whole reason everyone hates doing squats and hack squats and all of those exercises is simply because they are the most stressful, right? That's why literally everyone hates squats. But compared to something like a bicep curl, right? A bicep curl is much more enjoyable, as far as enjoyable can be, and when it comes to exercise, if you know what I mean. But when you stop doing legs and skip exercises like squats, you're skipping the exercise you hate most, which in turn is the most stressful exercise. So when you skip legs, right, you're removing the stressful exercises, you're having less cortisol, you're also carrying less total muscle, right? Because if you train your legs can hold up a lot of muscle. Right, let's say you train your whole body for a few years and you put on 40 pounds of extra mass, extra muscle mass. That's an extra 40 pounds that your heart has to pump blood to. That's an extra 40 pounds your joints have to handle. And that's an extra 40 pounds that all of your organs have to handle. But if you just skip legs and you don't build muscle in your legs, you can have the same upper body physique, but you've only added 25 pounds of muscle. So again, it's a lot less stress on your heart, on your body, basically half the stress just by skipping legs. And of course, when you skip legs, you have shorter workouts that are more enjoyable, and it improves aesthetics too, right? Having huge legs, especially the quads, is actually really bad for aesthetics because firstly, right, in terms of sexual dimorphism, men naturally have more mass in their upper body. So when you focus more on your upper body, it actually makes you look more masculine and more attractive. But also having huge quads like this basically makes your lower body look wider, and it gives you like an upside down triangle type look, and it's just not very attractive at all. Right? And again, like I said, the whole point of male gym selling is to build up the upper body so you have the illusion of wider clavicles and a wider upper body frame. So yeah, the best point I can give you is to just skip legs. That's the best thing you can do for having less stress, less cortisol, and less aging when it comes to gym selling. So that is the most looked down upon softmax that I want you to at least consider, right? If you're a primal guy. So yeah, if you found that helpful, you can go check out the BP Fitness System, link in the description. I basically cover a bunch of stuff like how to use gym selling as the most powerful LooksMax, and how to assess your frame, assess your bone structure, how to use some illusion strategies like clothing strategies, also fraud maxing strategies like height frauding, frame frauding, all of the best methods to do that. And also, of course, how to build muscle without aging or stressing yourself, how to get in the primal diet, how to use carbs effectively and maximize your health indicators through the diet, all of that stuff. And of course, some science-based, the most meta science-based lifting stuff, so that once you determine the best physique for your structure, you can reach there as fast as possible through modern science-based lifting, whilst also minimizing all of the aging and cortisol and stuff. And there's also the Discord community when you join, right? You have the private forums, the text channels, the voice channels. You can message all the other people in there as well. And this is just what a few of the videos look like once you join inside. Right? I have the videos, presentations, and also some PDFs attached to it as well. So if you're interested, you can go check that out and join the BP Fitness system. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video.